We keep talking about, Lord forbid, if something happened to the both of us, but what if something happened to one of us, and then the other one is still here?
See, and that's where we differ, because...
That's where we differ.
You look at me like, you're gonna be...
Kandi Burruss' daughter finally speaks on Todd Tucker. Something wasn't right. Stop everything, because what just surfaced out of the Burruss-Tucker household has flipped reality TV history upside down. For years, fans were fed one carefully polished story: Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker, a power couple who simply grew apart. No scandal. No chaos. Just a quiet fade. But tonight, that story officially collapses, because the one voice nobody thought would ever speak has finally broken the silence, and what she said sent shockwaves through the internet. Kandi Burruss' daughter has finally spoken out, and her words didn't come with tears, rage, or theatrics. They came with something.
And not even that, but I think you guys treat your kids' lifestyles very different.
Look at this view.
16, got a high-rise apartment in the city.
Kayla said she's going to New York.
Wait, what?
Only thing I did tell her, at least if you are gonna go, you should work, stack someone.
Far more chilling. Certainty. One sentence. Calm. Direct. Devastating. Something wasn't right. That's it. And somehow, that was enough to crack open a decade of carefully managed appearances. Within minutes, old clips started resurfacing. Arguments that once felt harmless now look loaded. Awkward silences suddenly feel intentional. Fans are asking questions they were never supposed to ask. Because when a child speaks, not as a reality star, not as a performer, but as someone who lived inside the house, you don't just hear their opinion. You hear patterns. You hear survival. And insiders are already whispering that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment comment. This was years in the making. Years of watching. Years of noticing shifts no one else wanted to acknowledge. Social media is in full meltdown mode. Twitter wars. Viral breakdowns. Bloggers scrambling. Celebrities reacting without saying names. And behind it all is one terrifying possibility: if the kids saw this coming. How long did the adults know and say nothing? Because this isn't just about a marriage ending. This is about control, silence, and a truth that waited patiently until the moment it could no longer be contained. And trust, once you hear what comes next, you'll never look at this family the same way again. The moment those words left her mouth, everything changed. Not because they were loud, not because they were accusatory, but because they were controlled. Something wasn't right. According to insiders, that sentence landed like a silent alarm inside the Burruss-Tucker orbit. Phones allegedly started buzzing behind the scenes. Group chats went dark. And people who had spent years confidently repeating the same polished narrative suddenly didn't know what to say anymore. Because when a daughter speaks from memory instead of emotion, the ground underneath the story starts to shift. For years, the public believed they understood the household. Kandi, the provider. Todd, the disciplinarian. A blended family navigating normal tension under an abnormal spotlight. That was the script. But sources now claim that inside the home, the balance was never neutral. It was calculated. Structured in a way that rewarded compliance and quietly punished discomfort. And according to those close to the family, Kandi's daughter clocked that imbalance long before anyone else did. She just didn't have the language, or the permission, to name it yet. What fans are now re-examining with fresh eyes are moments that once felt insignificant. The dinners where her voice was absent. The conversations where she deferred instead of engaged. The scenes where Todd spoke in lessons and metrics while Kandi translated emotion. At the time, viewers laughed it off as parenting differences. Now, insiders say it felt more like a hierarchy. One where authority wasn't negotiated, it was enforced. And for a child trying to grow inside that environment, the pressure didn't explode. It compressed. Sources allege that Todd's presence in the household wasn't chaotic or aggressive. That's what made it harder to challenge. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't violent. He was consistent. Measured. Corporate. According to people who observed the dynamic closely, everything became a lesson. Every disagreement was framed as a teachable moment. Every emotional response was reframed as entitlement. And over time, that reframing did something dangerous. It made discomfort look like a flaw instead of a signal. As these claims circulated, social media did what it always does when a narrative cracks. It went digging. Old episodes resurfaced. Clips were slowed down, dissected, stitched together with new commentary. One video in particular went viral. Kandi defending Todd's approach to discipline while her daughter sat quietly, eyes lowered, disengaged. "She's just spoiled," fans once said. Now the comments read very differently. "She was already done. That's not attitude, that's withdrawal. She stopped fighting because fighting didn't change anything." Then came the alleged insider leaks. Anonymous messages claiming the daughter had raised concerns privately years ago, only to be told she was being dramatic, sensitive, or resistant to growth. Screenshots circulated showing conversations where her boundaries were reframed as disrespect. Where her need for reassurance was labeled dependency. According to these alleged exchanges, she wasn't asking for control. She was asking for consistency. And what she got instead was evaluation. Things reportedly intensified once other children entered the picture. Different backgrounds. Different parenting philosophies. Different expectations. Fans online immediately jumped to favoritism accusations, but insiders pushed back. They say it wasn't favoritism. It was differentiation. And differentiation, when handled poorly, breeds resentment fast. One child was taught comfort was earned. Another was taught comfort was dangerous. And living under two ideologies in one home, sources say, created a quiet rivalry no one addressed directly. That rivalry didn't need shouting matches to grow. It lived in comparison. In who got more freedom. Who got more scrutiny. Who was trusted. Who was tested. According to whispers now spreading, Kandi's daughter felt constantly measured against an invisible standard she didn't set and couldn't meet. And when she pushed back, the response wasn't empathy. It was instruction. The internet truly erupted when fans revisited an old conversation about money, independence, and housing. What once sounded like a philosophical debate now reads like a power struggle. Todd advocating toughness. Kandi advocating support. And in the middle, a daughter trying to understand which version of love she was supposed to accept. Insiders claim that conversation was far more impactful than viewers realized. Because it wasn't about money. It was about who decides worth. Then came the moment sources describe as the emotional fracture point. A gift. Publicly celebrated. Privately explosive. The car. On the surface, it looked like generosity. Underneath, according to insiders, it exposed a fault line that had been quietly widening for years. Not because of the gift itself, but because of what it symbolized. Power. Provision. Leverage. Who gives? Who owes? Who gets to decide when support becomes a problem? What allegedly followed wasn't a dramatic fight. It was worse. It was silence with intent. The kind that communicates disappointment without words. The kind that changes the temperature of a room permanently. According to sources, something was said that night that never left the walls, but it reshaped the household. From that moment on, the family didn't feel like a family. It felt like a structure. Fans now say that's when Todd's presence began to change. Not suddenly. Gradually. More time away. More business trips. More distance explained as responsibility. According to insiders, he wasn't pulling away emotionally. He was reorganizing. New York. Atlanta. Shorter calls. Delayed responses. Once that realization settled in, the story didn't slow down, it sharpened. What had felt like uncomfortable tension suddenly looked like a pattern, and once patterns are seen, they can't be unseen. According to insiders, the moment Kandi's daughter spoke, the family dynamic stopped being protected by silence and started being interrogated by memory. Not just her memory, but everyone else's too. Friends. Crew members. People who had been around long enough to notice the shifts, but never close enough to challenge them. Whispers began surfacing about how conversations inside that house allegedly worked. Not loud arguments, not explosive fights, but negotiations. Everything was framed as logic. As preparation. As toughness disguised as love. Sources claim that if you disagreed, you weren't angry, you were ungrateful. If you pushed back, you weren't hurt, you were entitled. That framing, according to those who witnessed it, was devastating because it left no room for emotion to exist without being corrected. Social media chaos exploded when an alleged leaked voice memo started circulating. Grainy. Unverified. But chilling. A voice that fans swore sounded like Todd, calmly explaining that comfort creates weakness, and that kids need pressure to perform. Whether real or not, the clip went viral within hours. Comment sections erupted into war zones. Some applauded the sentiment. Others called it emotional austerity. But the damage was done, because it echoed exactly what Kandi's daughter had implied without ever saying his name. Old clips resurfaced showing Todd discussing parenting in interviews, always polished, always composed, always framed as wisdom. But now, fans were hearing those words differently. The tone felt colder. The pauses felt heavier. And people began asking the question no one had asked before: when does discipline stop being guidance and start becoming control? Insiders claim the household began to feel divided long before the public ever noticed. Not by arguments, but by alignment. Who agreed with which philosophy? Who felt safe speaking freely? Who chose silence to avoid being labeled difficult? According to sources, Kandi often found herself mediating, not between children, but between worldviews. Motherhood versus management. Nurture versus optimization. And while she tried to bridge the gap kept widening. The situation reportedly escalated when business conversations started bleeding into family life. Todd's producer mindset didn't turn off at the door, insiders say. Everything had goals. Metrics. Outcomes. Even family time allegedly felt scheduled, evaluated, and reviewed. And for a daughter who already felt measured, that atmosphere became suffocating. She wasn't failing. She was being assessed. Fans online began pointing out something eerie. Whenever conflict arose on camera, Todd rarely raised his voice. He stayed calm. Detached. Almost removed. And while that once made him look like the adult in the room, it now struck viewers as something else entirely. Emotional distance can feel like control when you're the only one allowed to remain unaffected. Then came the alleged meltdown no one saw. Sources claim there was a private confrontation that never made it to air. No yelling. No thrown objects. Just a line crossed. According to whispers, Kandi's daughter finally said she didn't feel safe expressing herself in her own home. Not physically unsafe. Emotionally unsafe. That distinction matters. Because emotional safety is harder to prove, and easier to dismiss. Insiders allege the response wasn't comfort. It was correction. She was told life isn't supposed to feel safe. That discomfort builds character. That shielding emotions creates dependency. Those words, if true, landed like a verdict. And from that moment on, the daughter allegedly stopped trying to be understood. She started observing instead. Observation became survival. She watched who spoke freely and who didn't. Who was praised and who was managed. Who received grace and who received lessons. And as she watched, she noticed something else. Decisions were being made without her. About her. For her. And every time she objected, it reinforced the narrative that she was resistant. The internet went feral when an old clip resurfaced of her saying, "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here." At the time, it was brushed off as teenage angst. Now, with everything unfolding, fans are calling it a confession that slipped through the cracks. Comment sections flooded with people saying they missed the signs. That they laughed when they shouldn't have. Then came the twist that split the fandom cleanly in half. Alleged messages surfaced suggesting that Todd believed Kandi was too soft on her daughter, and that softness would cost her in the long run. Supporters called it honesty. Critics called it undermining. But insiders claim that belief shaped more than just parenting. It shaped alliances inside the house. Because once one parent is framed as the problem, children inevitably get caught in the crossfire. The situation grew more volatile as the daughter got older. Independence became a battleground. Freedom was framed as risk. Support was framed as enabling. According to insiders, every step toward autonomy was met with resistance disguised as protection. And when she pushed for space, the pushback intensified. Then came the moment fans now describe as the quiet beginning of the end. Todd allegedly started spending more time away, citing work. New York became frequent. Atlanta became temporary. Calls shortened. Texts delayed. Presence replaced with planning. According to those close to the family, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like detachment. When Kandi quietly dropped Todd's last name from her digital footprint, it wasn't accompanied by drama. No announcement. No explanation. Just absence. Fans initially dismissed it as branding. Insiders now claim it was emotional severance. A signal that something irreversible had already happened. What shocked people most wasn't the separation. It was the lack of mourning. Sources allege the household atmosphere shifted from tension to release. And that release wasn't shared equally. One person's relief looked like another person's devastation. And that imbalance set the internet on fire. Speculation about celebration began circulating after a cryptic post allegedly surfaced from someone close to Todd's side, hinting at freedom and fresh starts. Whether misinterpreted or intentional, it landed like a slap. Because it suggested this wasn't just a marriage ending. It was a weight being lifted, for someone. As the narrative deepened, business chatter followed. Fans noticed changes in tone. In energy. Projects stalled. Announcements delayed. Insiders whisper that conversations behind closed doors shifted from emotional repair to strategic positioning. Prenup discussions resurfaced not as scandal, but as context. Because if power was always uneven, then the ending wasn't sudden. It was scheduled. Through it all, the daughter stayed composed. No interviews. No rants. No dramatic posts. Just distance. And distance, in situations like this, speaks louder than any accusation. Because it says you've already accepted what others are still trying to deny. Then she said something that chilled everyone paying attention. That this wasn't chaos. It was a system. A system that rewarded silence, corrected emotion, and confused control with care. And once she named it, the story stopped being about Todd versus Kandi. It became about structure versus humanity. That's where everything tightened. Because systems don't fall apart loudly. They resist. They protect themselves. They wait for attention to fade. But the internet began doing what it does best when official statements don't come. It started tracking behavior. Who stopped posting? Who suddenly limited comments? Who appeared untouched by the fallout? And most importantly, who no longer appeared anywhere near each other? Fans noticed that Todd's absence wasn't just emotional or symbolic, it was logistical. Familiar spaces. Familiar circles. Familiar collaborations. All gone. Not gradually. Cleanly. According to online watchers, this didn't look like someone taking time to heal. It looked like someone being phased out. And that distinction mattered. Because leaving suggests choice. Phasing out suggests decision-making happened elsewhere. Quietly. Strategically. Without public spectacle. Meanwhile, Kandi's daughter's tone continued to change in subtle but telling ways. She didn't escalate. She didn't dramatize. She didn't capitalize on attention. She did something far more unsettling. She became calm. And calm, after prolonged silence, usually means acceptance. Not of the situation, but of the truth. Insiders say she wasn't seeking validation anymore. She was preserving accuracy. That's when fans started revisiting everything with a colder lens. Old interviews where Todd spoke about family began to feel transactional. Phrases about building character and earning outcomes were replayed against the daughter's statements, and suddenly the alignment was impossible to ignore. It wasn't that he hid his philosophy. It was that no one questioned how it landed on the people living under it. One resurfaced clip in particular reignited outrage. Todd calmly stating that children shouldn't expect comfort, that life doesn't work that way. At the time, it sounded firm. Now, paired with everything else, it sounded like policy. And policies don't bend for feelings. They enforce compliance. Insiders allege that behind closed doors, conversations had already shifted from reconciliation to containment. Not emotional repair, but reputation management. Who speaks? Who doesn't? What gets addressed, and what gets ignored until the cycle moves on. But this time, the cycle wasn't moving. It was tightening. Speculation around business implications grew louder. Not because of confirmed losses, but because of hesitation. Projects paused. Energy cooled. People waited. In entertainment, waiting is a tell. It means no one wants to be on the wrong side of a story that hasn't finished unfolding. And according to whispers, some partners were quietly reassessing alignment, not out of judgment, but caution. The most chilling moment came when Kandi's daughter alluded, briefly, carefully, to something she wasn't ready to say yet. Not a threat. Not a teaser. A boundary. And boundaries like that don't exist unless consequences do. The internet felt it immediately. Comment sections shifted from outrage to unease. Because everyone understood what that meant. There was more. And it wasn't being shared out of mercy, not fear. Fans began asking a different question altogether. Not who's wrong, but who benefited. Because when a system operates for years without being challenged, it's because it serves someone well. And once that lens was applied, the story stopped feeling messy and started feeling engineered. Todd's public detachment, once praised as maturity, now read as insulation. Emotional distance as risk management. Calm as control. None of this was proven. None of it needed to be. The patterns spoke loudly enough on their own. And then there was the aftermath that no one could ignore. No explosive interviews. No tearful sit-downs. Just separation, so clean it felt surgical. Lives reorganized. Circles tightened. Futures recalculated. If this had been heartbreak, there would have been mess. Instead, there was order. Kandi's daughter didn't push the narrative further. She didn't have to. Her restraint did more damage than any accusation could. Because restraint suggests certainty. And certainty terrifies systems built on silence. By now, the public wasn't waiting for answers. They were watching outcomes. Who advanced? Who stalled? Who disappeared? Who remained untouched? Because truth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just rearranges the room and lets you notice who's no longer standing where they used to. The most unsettling realization for many fans was this: if the daughter was right, then this wasn't a marriage unraveling. It was a household being restructured until one influence no longer fit. And once something no longer fits a system, it's removed, not argued with. Toward the end of the conversation, Kandi's daughter said something so quietly it nearly slipped past the noise. That some endings don't explode. They finalize. And that line lingered. Because explosions bring attention. Finalization brings permanence. Now, the story exists in a strange place. No official confirmations. No denials. No dramatic follow-ups. Just a heavy stillness where a narrative used to be. And stillness, when it arrives after years of tension, isn't peace. It's resolution without reconciliation. Fans continue to debate motives, intentions, blame. But the daughter never asked anyone to take sides. She simply told people to look. To notice. To remember.